We're coming live in a somewhat awkward way here because we don't have a slideshow.
Oh, okay.
Hi to all that are visiting with us. We're going to wait until 7 o'clock before we actually start here.
Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. People are streaming into the living room. Thank you for being here tonight for a very special program. My name's Jason Silverman. I'm here at the CCA, sitting in the studio, feeling lonely here without all of you. We're grateful to have you here with us virtually, and hopefully we'll get back into the theater sometime soon. The Living Room series started shortly after the quarantine began. We were really determined to keep on bringing stories that are inspiring and meaningful and trying to do what we can to connect Santa Fe during the shutdown. And hopefully you've enjoyed it. We've done about 40-something programs already, and we've had some incredible programs. I'm especially excited about tonight's program. It was suggested by Joan Tewksbury, and it's a film that I saw years ago and that stayed in my bloodstream, but I had forgotten just how incredible it was until I saw it again. I hope you guys all got a chance to watch it prior. And we'll be talking about it tonight. Before we start and I introduce the panelists, I'd like to say that the living room is largely free now. We were charging for tickets for the first 40 or so, but we wanted to make sure that everyone who wanted to participate could participate. So we are, instead of charging tickets, we're asking for your support voluntarily. If you can give a little, please do. The way you do that is by clicking on that little Donate Now button that popped up. And what will happen is a new window will pop up, and you can leave it there and not deal with it until after the program, so you won't miss a thing. So if you can give a little, that's great. If you can give a lot, even better. We appreciate your support. So Spirit of the Beehive, we're going to hear a lot about this film tonight from three very articulate film lovers, and they all have their individual takes on it. And we did a kind of rehearsal of this, and I was telling them to stop and save some of this great stuff for the actual event, because there's so much to say about this film. There's so many ways to open up into it, and it still seems completely rich and relevant. It's now been how many years? 45 years, 47 years since it was made. Yeah, we're gonna have a good time. If you would like to ask the panelists a question, click on your chat button and type it in, and we will get to it. We're looking forward to your questions, and we'll have some clips too. So anyway, thanks again for being here. Please support the CCA and other arts and culture organizations. I'm going to start by introducing our panel. I'm going to start with Joan, who we're really grateful to have with us for the first time in the living room. Joan began her career as a dancer performer. She was actually Mary Martin's understudy in Jerome Robbins' Peter Pan. She danced all over the US and became a choreographer. She then became a filmmaker. Her best known credit is for the screenplay for Robert Altman's Nashville, which is acknowledged as one of the great classics of American independent cinema. Let's just say cinema, great classics of cinema. Her directorial debut, Old Boyfriends, opened at the Cannes Film Festival, and then for reasons of the marketplace and not because of the quality of the film, disappeared until it was recently restored. We were really fortunate to have a screening on 35 millimeter at the CCA last year with Joan in person. And she has a huge number of TV and theater credits as a writer and director. She's also an advisor to the Sundance Institute and has mentored dozens and dozens of young filmmakers. Thank you, Joan, for being here.
Thank you.
Paul, should I introduce you? Because I think everyone has heard the introduction to you.
Yeah, it's the same old Paul Barnes. You don't have to go through the whole thing.
Paul needs no introduction. Paul is one of America's great documentary film editors. Has worked with many great filmmakers. Is best known for his work over nearly 30 years with Ken Burns, including the Civil War, baseball, the Vietnam War, the war, etc., etc., etc. He's going to be back with us on sometime next week. We're going to postpone our Tuesday event because it's the time of the presidential debate. But he'll be talking to Rick Burns about his new film about Oliver Sacks. He'll also be back to talk about the passage of the 19th Amendment with Ali McGraw in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Paul, again for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
My good friend Mara Fortes is a researcher and curator. She has written books about all kinds of cinema. She curates experimental documentary and film, and she is a curator at the Telluride Film Festival. Welcome, Mara. She also came and presented programs here in Santa Fe 2 years ago in conjunction with our Ricardo Mazal show. So welcome back to Santa Fe, Mara. And you guys, I'm just going to let you guys get going. I think we're going to start with Mara.
Yes.
Yes.
Mara, your audio is off.
Oh, oops. Okay.
No.
Good.
Now. Yeah.
Okay, now we can hear you. It's good.
Good. Okay. So I have to say, I mean, the last time I had seen this film was when I was a child, probably in the early 90s, late 80s. And it's a film that's known as an allegorical film about the fascism in Spain, notably, the impact of the Civil War and then the Franco dictatorship. And so for me, I think when I saw it, I was kind of like the little girl in the film where, I obviously didn't have the context of the Civil War or knew who Franco was. So I basically just, saw that something probably really bad had happened that made these people, the parents especially, be these solipsistic ghosts. But I didn't really understand the sort of historical background. So it was an interesting exercise to kind of go into examining a little bit of the context of Spain and also of Victor Erice. So I thought I would just start out by giving a little bit of biographical details on Victor Erice and a little bit about the Spanish Civil War to kind of set the way I read the film the second time that I saw it. And I think the first thing that's really interesting to mention is that the film was made in 1973, so kind of towards the tail end of the Franco dictatorship, which was from 1939 to 1975 until his death. And but the film is set in 1940, so it's interesting that between the world of the film and the kind of world of its production, it encompasses the entire arc of the dictatorship. And the other interesting detail is that Victor Erice was born in 1940. So he was that generation that was born basically into the Franco regime and lived the impact of the Civil War as a child. And he's one of the most well-known filmmakers in Spain, I think probably along with Luis Buñuel and Carlos Saura. But he's only made 3 feature films spaced out in, more or less every 10 years. But they have had a huge impact. So, and of course, he's also made short films. And I think the last thing I saw from Victor Erice was a really interesting exhibit where he made these video letter correspondences with Abbas Kiarostami. But these 3 films are kind of like the 3 pillars of his filmography, and Spirit of the Beehive being his very first film. Then he made one called The South, which is actually an unfinished film. And his last feature film was sorry if I mispronounced this English word, but it's the quince tree sun. The quince is that fruit. I hope I pronounced it right. And
Mara, did you want the slideshow happening while you're doing this? I forgot.
oh, yeah, if it's available, sure. And you know, Victor Erice, he was born in Vizcaya, which is the sort of one of the northernmost provinces in Spain, and that was kind of key to his cinephilia because, of course, during the Franco regime, there was a lot of repression. There were a lot of banned films, but he was very close to the French border, so he was actually able to watch films in French cinemas. And I think a lot of his formative years as a young cinephile and as a filmmaker came from being able to see films in the French the French cinemas. And you know, he's also part of the European filmmakers of the post-war years, and started out as a film critic for Nuestro Cine, which was this Spanish film journal. So a little bit like the Cahiers du Cinéma filmmakers, you know, Chabrol, Truffaut. He was kind of part of that moment in cinema history that was also influenced by the boom of film festivals, by the boom of film archives. So it was kind of like the first generation that could have a full consciousness of the history of cinema. And of course, you know, along with his filmmaking, he has remained a great thinker, writer about cinema, a teacher, and still teaches. And I think, you know, of course, he was very influenced by the formalist experiments of the Nouvelle Vague, by Italian neorealism, and also by the, you know, generation of people like Pasolini. And I would say also surrealism, just in the sense, and I think it's very palpable in this film, that he's very interested in that reality that is kind of like the interior world, or you know, the psychology, the unconscious, whatever we want to call it. But the difference is that he grew up as a filmmaker under a repressive regime, under censorship, and it's because, you know, both the school where he went, which was in Madrid, as well as the Barcelona school, were interested in developing kind of formal ways, or a cinematographic language that could speak to the sense of repression, to the political situation, but that could also strategically evade the censors. And you know, if you've seen this film, a lot of it is about how to give expression to the silences of historical trauma, the silences of, you know, what each character experiences in their individual world. And so I think, and I, you know, adding to that sort of universe of silence, it's interesting that after Franco died, the transition to democracy in Spain was kind of based on this pact of forgetting. You know, this was called the Amnesty Law. And if anyone's interested in knowing more about it, there's a documentary on Netflix called The Silence of Others. But it was basically, let's just forget what happened and start anew. So it was also kind of like an officialized, institutionalized form of silence to transition to democracy. But Jason, how do I see the slides? Because I can't see them on my. Oh, okay, got it. Okay. Just to give a little bit of information on how the project started, is Victor Erice was kind of commissioned to do a commercial project, which was essentially, you know, a telling of the Frankenstein story, and he was kind of working on the project. Eventually, realized that the producer did not have enough funds to make a big monster movie. And so he was pondering what to do. And he had this still from the Frankenstein film on his desk of the little girl Mary meeting the monster Frankenstein. And he claims that's when he had the idea for the film. Like that image captured the whole concept for him. And I think that is also kind of a key to why the presence of cinema itself is really important in his films. And in every one of his films, there's kind of like a situation of a film within a film and an act of spectating within the film. Now, just to, and the title, of comes from Maurice Maeterlinck, who was a symbolist, mystic, Belgian poet. And the spirit of the beehive, I think, in the context of the film, is talked about as a reference to this idea that just as bees behave as if or obey to some mysterious spirit, so does a society under fascism. This kind of mindless obedience or automatism, and also the fracturing and the insularity of the beehive. So that's kind of, I think in the film there's both explicit references to the Civil War and to fascism, and also mostly tacit references to the sense of oppression. I wanted to give just a little bit of context about the Spanish Civil War, but I have to say I'm neither a historian or Spanish, and it's also an extremely complicated chapter in the history of the 20th century. So I apologize in advance if it's very kind of brief and generalizing, but all to say that it was, in the 19th century Spain, it was a very turbulent time for Spain. There was a very quick succession from monarchy to a republican government, which was the first republic, and then to a military dictatorship in the 1920s. And also a very fractured society. There was a lot of famine, a lot of poverty, especially a lot of polarization, not unlike, I think, what we are experiencing now in the world. But basically there was pressure to have a democratically elected government. So finally in 1931, the different factions of mostly the left came together under the Popular Front, and that was the first democratically elected government in the 20th century in Spain. The problem was that there were all these factions. I'm just going to name a few, but there were like Basque nationalists, Catalan nationalists, there were communists, anarchists, anti-clericalists, moderate Catholics, super right-wing Catholics, and then the fascist party, which was kind of came together under the what's called the Falange. I think in English it's the same, the Phalange. And this democratically elected government started also alienating some of the more moderate factions, particularly in its super anti-clerical politics. And so that also caused the kind of right-wing factions to come together and organize. And under Federico Franco, who was a general and eventually staged a coup, and was aided to a great extent by the Italian fascists and by Adolf Hitler, with arms and military power. And I think the kind of, for me, the two key legacies of the Spanish Civil War was that also this idea of silence, was that it frayed the fabric of Spanish society in the factions. So it destroyed families. It was extremely bloody. There was a lot of terrorism tactics on both sides, and then the international response was also kind of divided. The only two nations that officially supported the left wing or the Republican Army were Mexico and the Soviet Union. I think because Stalin saw that it was a prelude to what was to come, and then the Western democracies kind of turned a blind eye and officially espoused a non-interventionist policy, even though many people from other countries joined the Republican cause with the international brigades. But there was this kind of fracture of society, and also this pretending or turning a blind eye officially by the Western democracies. And I think in the film, Paul, you had mentioned, I think, this symbol when we talked yesterday, but
yes,
you have some explicit references to the impact of the Civil War. One is this symbol, which was the flag of the Phalange, which was the super right-wing fascist party. And then if people who saw the film, if you remember, there's a scene where the little girl is flipping through an album of photos, and she sees a photo of her father, and on the left is Jose Ortega y Gasset, who was a Spanish philosopher, and on the right is Miguel de Unamuno, who was an existentialist writer, playwright, poet. And Ortega y Gasset he was a critic of the Franco regime, and so he had to live in exile. And Unamuno is interesting because he was first a critic of the military dictatorship in the 20s. Then he supported the Republican government, but became disillusioned when the Republican government was becoming really anti-clerical. And then he became a critic of the Franco regime, and he actually died under house arrest imposed by Franco. So those are kind of the explicit clues in the film that deal with the historical context. But I think what's more interesting to me in the film is all these kind of implicit or more mysterious elements in the film. And one I wanted to mention is, the song that the mother plays on the piano is a song by Federico Garcia Lorca, who was a Spanish poet, and he was actually assassinated by the nationalists, by the Franco regime. His body has never been found, or his remains, and Federico Garcia Lorca, I found that he wrote a poem that's called "The Song of Honey," and I just wrote a few of the lines because I think there's obviously the symbolism of the beehive that references the sort of fascist, horrible, mindless obedience. But then there's this other symbolism of honey that I think it relates more to the little girl's explorations and to me, the more hopeful, optimistic reading of the idea of the beehive and the honey. And so a few lines from this poem are, honey is the mummy of the light of paradise. So it's like the embalming of the light of paradise. Honey is the epic poem of love, the materiality of the infinite, the soul and streaming blood of flowers condensed through another spirit. And I like it because I think the whole movement of the film is also, I was, yesterday I was talking about kind of the honey-like trickling pace of the film, but also this idea that, the sense of space and time is very ambiguous. And, you never get a sense of how much time actually passes from one scene to the next. And there's this, you see these different spaces in the film, but there's no, you never see a long shot where you see the whole geography of the town. You have these very also fractured compositions of the characters. I'm thinking of the scene where they're in the dining room table. You never get a scene of the whole family dining together. You just get in the individual shots. But there's, there's also all these kind of figures that to me are like presence absence, and that the little girl is trying to fill in. And it's as if she's trying to fill in this void that has been left by this horrifically bloody conflict, and that she doesn't understand why her parents are ghosts, and she's trying to fill in that information. So I just found this slide of the footprint and also the shadow play of the little girls, and actually they're voicing what their parents had said. So it's like the shadows are their parents in that moment. And to me, what kind of holds or glues the geography together of the film is the film within the film, is the viewing of Frankenstein. And I just selected this image because Victor Erice talks about seeing, I think it's Rome Open City, which was a forbidden film in Spain. And he talks about how watching that film in this clandestine screening really marked him, because it wasn't the act of seeing a film was an act of resistance. And in this shot, you really see the contrast between the adults witnessing the scene where the little girl is thrown into the lake and dies. So you see the difference of what adults witnessing death look like, which is basically faces that are not really excited in any way, which is a sense that they are used to seeing death, and then the little kids in this total wonderment at that scene. So it's a good image for the split between the childhood and the adult world, but also specifically in the moment of witnessing death. And then, you know, the very beginning of the film is like once upon a time in a Castilian plateau around 1940. So you don't even get a specific time. And I think, and I hope that, you know, as I'm sure Joan will talk about, but there's something timeless about the film that feels so about our present moment. And I think it's because it's a film that's ambiguous about time, but also about optics, and also about the atmosphere of fascism, the atmosphere of turbulence. And so it's about something that cannot be contained geographically or in a specific frame of time. That to me, that's why it kind of feels very relevant. So yes, I think I will stop there because now I feel like I've talked a lot.
And said a lot of very good things, Mara. Thank you. Joan, do you want to go and make an opening statement, or do you want me to proceed?
Oh, go ahead and proceed, and I will join.
Okay. I just want to say that for me, I first saw the film in 1973, and at that point, I was still a film student, or basically, I had just graduated NYU's film school in the early 70s, and at the time, I was very struck by the cinema of Robert Bresson and Yasujiro Uzu, the Japanese filmmaker, where their films were very, very slow. They were very concerned with images and telling the stories through the images and not so much through the dialogue. And when I heard about The Spirit of the Beehive, I mean, I was a very enthusiastic cinemaphile from a very early age. But when we hadn't really seen very many films from Spain. And the reviews and critiques I was reading about The Spirit of the Beehive was very intriguing to me. And so I ran to this film, and I remember just absolutely loving it and being totally mesmerized by it in 1973. And and again, what really struck me was how much that Victor Erice was conveying through visuals and through silence, and that he was allowing the audience to kind of piece the story together, because there's hardly any exposition whatsoever, and so he really makes you work to really understand the meanings of the films and the emotions of the films, which is a kind of cinema that I truly appreciate. And so I was really incredibly captivated by this film. I had not seen it. Well, the other thing in 73 that struck me too, I was a child of the 60s, and my parents, I had grown up, my parents had gone through the Depression and World War II. And so when I was growing up, I heard lots of stories about the Depression and World War II and the fight against fascism. And, it was very much a part of who I was and a part of my developing politics for sure. And what always struck me about the outcome of World War II was that Spain was the only nation that remained basically a fascist government once the war was over. And, there were political events that happened during that time, that always continually reminded me that, we had a repressive government in Spain from the right, and then we had those wonderful repressive governments of the Soviet Union and China and Cuba from the left. And, basically they're all dictatorships. And again, as a child of the 60s, I certainly was both an ardent anti-fascist and an ardent anti-communist. And so what the story that Victor tells in The Spirit of the Beehive it struck me then, and then when I rewatched it now, what really came across to me is that the film accumulates a vast amount of power as it goes along, because you are working and piecing the story together with little tiny clues, as Mara mentioned. And for me, the overall feeling of the film is an incredible feeling of loss and sadness and a repression of life. You feel it from the mother, you feel it from the father. And the two little girls are caught up in this kind of almost lack of humanity that is present in her parents for reasons they can't quite understand or grasp. And so that by the end of the film, you just it's a horrifying feeling, but it really made me feel. He allows you to kind of feel what it feels like to live in under the throes of a fascist government or under the throes of a communist government, and it's deeply horrifying to me. It was then, and again, watching the film, at a much older age now, and especially with what we are going through right now, the resonances in the film were just all over the place, and it just was again an incredibly rich experience for me to experience that all over again in this particular time. Joan, do you want to comment?
Sure. I came to this film through Carlos Sara, and we were shooting Nashville, and Geraldine Chaplin was living with Carlos at the time, and they had been a part of the Basque resistance and hiding people in the basement, etc. And he did not speak English and I did not speak Spanish, but we sort of spoke through this strange sign language, and he almost insisted that I be sure to see this film because it was about subversion. And I've been working with Altman, who was all about subverting and telling a story without ever telling a story about the real story. It was always there, sometimes in your face and sometimes not. But the thing that struck me about the film was the quality of space so that the audience could fill in the feelings, to experience the feelings. And when I looked at the film again, and I have over the years looked at this film, it is a love story without ever having any kind of contact, so that each member of this family is in a state of longing, in a way, for something to hold them, something to make contact with, even though when they cannot connect with one another. So as a director, I watched this film and I watched the absolute trust that the director had for each of the individuals who are participating in this film, so that the layers of the existing political situation, but the existing political situation that happens in every family. So it's this layer cake of emotions that you, the audience, are given enough space to experience in the honey-dripping quality that Mara talks about. So in your own time, you can absorb it. Half the time, or not half, but when I first saw the film, I no more could have told you what the film was about than Fly to the Moon. But it stayed inside of me to the point of I identified with all the characters, and the beauty of looking at those vistas. And so we talked about what film, and I said, for right now, I think that this is a very important film to show for any artist to be able to tell the story of something so such so dire. And forgive me, but I feel that way now. But for a filmmaker to be able to exist in that atmosphere is something that I think that we should think about embracing now, and seeing how subversive we, as filmmakers, writers, artists, can be.
Yes. I'm just. Shall we start showing a few clips, and then we can talk about them on the other side? Jason had asked each of us if we would choose some clips for scenes that particularly struck us, and the first scene that I particularly chose was this very first clip where the mother, Teresa, is writing a letter. Jason, could you play that first clip?
Aunque ya nada pueda hacer volver las horas felices que pasamos juntos, pido a Dios que me conceda la alegría de volver a encontrarte. Se lo he pedido siempre, desde que nos separamos en medio de la guerra. Y se lo sigo pidiendo ahora, en este rincón donde Fernando, las niñas y yo tratamos de sobrevivir. Salvo las paredes.
Ah. I'm not sure. On my webcam here, the clip stopped. So did the whole thing play through, Jason? Or Mara, Joan, did you see the whole clip?
No.
I think it played through for the audience. Let us know, audience, if it went through. It was still playing. There's a section where you can watch what the audience is watching. So I think it just froze for us.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right. I just want to comment on that. You know, if you think back to the film opens with the truck delivering the film to the village and getting it set up. The next scene is a scene of Fernando, the father, beekeeping. And at the end of that scene, that's when the letter comes in. And that's but you have no idea of, you know, who anybody is or exactly what's going on. I mean, you don't know who the man tending the bees is. Then you go to the woman writing the letter. You don't really know who she is. But what a major clue is contained in that first letter. And again, it's not the standard kind of exposition whatsoever. But what she writes is, I was most happy in that time we spent together before the war. Little but the walls are left of the house you once knew. I look around me and see so much loss. My ability to feel life has vanished along with all of the rest. And, you know, it's sort of like the first real words with any kind of clues are all about loss. There was a love in her life and it's gone. She's trying to survive with this man called Fernando and the girls. And the marriage is implied so that you have to figure out for yourself that it might have been a past lover or she was having an affair. These are just little clues that are dropped. But the main thrust of the letter is that all of that happiness is gone. It's just vanished. And that they're just struggling to kind of maintain and survive. And that kind of feeling of lost and what's what's been vanishing in their lives. It kind of it runs through that letter in some ways colors the whole rest of the film in a certain way because you don't quite forget it. And she mentions, that home, little but the walls are left of the house that we once knew. And then as the film goes along, when Isabel takes her sister Anna to see the spirit that she has described, you immediately recall the letter and think, well, is this the home where the mother had the affair? Again, Arise is making you piece all these things together. And then, of course, in the course of the film, the soldier, the fugitive, whoever you want to call him, jumps off the train and winds up back at this abandoned home. And so then you make the connection that this must be the man that Teresa had an affair with or was in love with, before the marriage, whatever it was. But that's how he's very subtly connecting all these things together. So it's in terms of script writing, it's so striking because, again, they're just little clues that you have to remember and keep in the back of your mind and then piece together as these other sequences begin to accumulate. And I think it's one of the most remarkable things about the film, and I think it's one of the reasons why the film accumulates in power, because the film constantly makes you ask questions. What is that about? Who is she writing to? What does that mean? And then you begin to make connections as you go along with the abandoned house, and that's probably where Teresa met her lover. So it's a very, very striking element of the film, and it continues throughout. Mara, Joan, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, it leads into the clip of the mother of Teresa. Mara, did you have a clip before we go to Teresa in the bedroom? I can't hear you.
Oops. No, I think it's great to show the clip of her in the bedroom.
And
Okay.
I chose this clip not only for the content of the scene, but for the trust between an actor and a director, and how the quality of light extends this story. But you get the whole longing, the psychology, the imprint of the marriage in a scene without any dialogue, and it is as still a scene as you can watch in cinema, and it would never be allowed to be this long today.
Right.
So,
Shall we look at the clip, Joan, and then?
Yeah.
Jason, can you play clip number 4?
And much has been made about the bars on the bed and all of the symbolism and okay, that's it, and the confinement of a marriage and all of that. But the thing that strikes me about this is if you have been locked in a situation that you can't escape, and you are caught in a state between is it danger or do I give in, or she is in fact trapped, but the quality of letting that play out in the way that it does is just to me it's incredibly striking.
Yeah, it's also that what hits me about that scene as well is Arise's use of sound.
Yes.
That basically we hear Fernando's footsteps come in. We hear him slowly taking off his clothes, getting ready to go into bed. You hear some distant church bells. And it's very interesting that the last sound effect you hear is the train. So the train coming into town, the whistle going off in the distance, and the train plays such a big part of the film. I mean, that's how Teresa's lover is going to return, is by that train. And she mailed the letter on the train at the beginning of the film. So again, those wonderful ties. It's just a sound effect that makes you think about, ties it to the letter and then ties it later to the arrival of her former lover. It's fascinating.
Yes.
And watching, and I'm so struck by the actress who, as you said, the trust between actress and director, because he really did allow her, I can't imagine what his direction might have been to her, but he allowed her to turn away from him as she knows he's coming in, which is an obvious choice. But then, she just lays there still. We know she's awake, but but she keeps her eyes closed for the longest time. But she's faking. And then at the end, she momentarily opens her eyes, and the actress's choices in that are quite remarkable. And from an editing standpoint, that's like a minute and a half holding on one shot. I mean, that's almost unheard of these days.
Yeah.
But
Well,
Victor,
and also,
but Arise is just trusting the audience to take this all in and feel what she's feeling.
I think also, I mean, in addition to confinement, I was thinking too how there's this porousness in the whole film, that I kind of linked to the honeycomb and the holes, but that sounds contaminate the image and shadows contaminate the image.
Yes.
So, your attention as a viewer is constantly going beyond the frame. So it's not actually confined to that space. And I also, it's whenever I hear slow cinema, I always think, well, slow in relation to what? Because I think, as the effect of slow cinema is that it speeds up your thoughts as a viewer.
Yes.
As it actually has the effect of speeding up, as opposed to whatever the content is we consume most through our phones, which is like slows you down because you're not actually thinking, you're just like ingesting and ingesting. So I think slow cinema is a misnomer because it has an effect.
Mara, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, the slow-paced films just make you think more. It makes you absorb more. It makes you see more. It makes you hear more.
And it also, and you are so invested, it becomes you. And Pauline Kael's quote about, what was it? I lost it in the dark.
I lost that at the movies.
Lost it at the movies. But what's the one about dark? At any rate, that you sit in a dark space and you become every single character of the movie. And that's, for me, that's what happens. I'm all those people in that, we can identify.
Exactly. Should we go to a clip that Mara picked out?
Yeah.
Jason, if you could show clip number 2.
Hágame caso. Puede ser sorprende. Dígame, ¿no ha deseado hacer nunca nada? ¿Qué pasaría si no fuéramos más allá de lo desconocido? ¿No ha ambicionado mirar más allá de las nubes y las estrellas? ¿O saber lo que hace crecer los árboles y cambiar las sombras? Pero hablando así, le llamo. Ahora, que si yo pudiera descubrir alguna de estas cuestiones, ¿qué es la eternidad, por ejemplo? No me importaría absolutamente nada que dijeran que estoy loco. Es usted joven. Le ha aturdido su éxito. Despierte y vea la realidad. Un demonio cuyo cerebro hay que dar tiempo para que se desarrolle. Es un cerebro perfecto, doctor. Bueno, debe enterarse. Procede de su laboratorio. El cerebro robado de mi laboratorio era el de un criminal.
That actually cut off a little quickly because then the older doctor is about to say that the brain was from a criminal.
Yes.
If you remember the Frankenstein film. Mara, what strikes you about this scene?
Well, so when I rewatched the film, I became obsessed with this idea of the screens within the film, and both the idea of screen as something that you project meaning onto, but also screen as something that screens you off from the world. And so and throughout the film, there's obviously all of these like frames within the frames, and of course the honeycomb pattern of the windows. But in this scene, I love how it is cinema that lures the father out to kind of unlock his insular world and peek out into the open. And the way that the dialogues from the film, you could read them in relation to, metaphorically, the kind of creation of the monster, of the dictator, of, the body controlled by a different brain, in relation to fascism. But also, if you think about the film within the film is kind of the thing that motivates or that drives the story, but also in this specific case, what motivates the camera movement, because it's like the camera is fixed and then it just moves towards the window. And I think that, and the dialogue that says, wake up and see reality, it's like, it's almost as if cinema is telling the father, wake up and see reality. And I like that there's this kind of dialectic in the film between the historical dimension, but also this mythic dimension that on the one hand is cinema and the cinematic reality that kind of trickles into that space, but also the idea of the make-believe world of the child. And it is those two registers, the kind of like the cinematic and the make-believe world of the child, that, kind of make you wake up to the reality of oppression. So I don't know, I just find it like a very beautiful moment where the ideas of the film are condensed, and also that it gives kind of presence and importance to the reality that's, could be a make-believe world, but that actually affects change in the world. And, if we go one step back, maybe that is Erice's hope too, is that cinema can affect a real change, a palpable change in the world beyond this film,
But
I don't know.
But you also, if you go a step in, the father refused the film. He refuses to go to the film. And yet the voice of the film is giving him some kind of solace or wisdom. So, and the other thing that strikes me about all of these things, they are done so effectively and simply without any effects. And when you stop and think that you could now, in this world, make a film on a cell phone that could be this personal and this effective, and yet we don't do it. Everyone jumps to making some kind of thing out of nothing. In this case, nothing informs the man who sort of pushes the children, or pushes all of the possibilities. He pushes them away, but yet they come to him through the sound across the way, not
Right.
directly to him.
Yeah. What strikes me too about this scene that's so memorable to me is I love the fact that Arise is using the dialogue from the film, which has its own dialectic in it. Basically, the older scientists and the younger scientists are talking about, a kind of idealism and a kind of practicality, and that's part of the argument.
Yes.
The older scientist is saying, Victor Frankenstein, you should not be experimenting with creating life, and yet Victor is trying to do something that's he feels is very idealistic and very hopeful. But it does have its own downside, and that's what Fernando is listening to. As the film grows, you get the feeling that the father is exiled. Fernando was exiled in this little town because he was on the wrong political side. That seems to come across later. And one thing I love about the scene, and it has to do with the honeycomb. Victor has Fernando stand up and go to the doors. And essentially, the honeycomb, again, as you said, Mara, is a symbol of repression, of this kind of obedience, of rote way of life. And he pushes half the honeycomb away. And as he opens the door into a larger world, into a larger vista, the line that's there says, "What if we went beyond the limits of the known?" That's what Victor Frankenstein says to the older. That's his argument to the older scientist. What if we push away the limits of the known? But then Fernando, who is obviously not a very courageous man, he winds up standing behind the honeycomb pattern. So this repression, this obedience, this conformity, he kind of goes into that side of the frame. I mean, I just was so was so struck by that when I saw it again. It was just this incredible, and the whole zoom in. It's a kind of a magical moment in which all of those ideas come across in a way that you said, Joan, in a very simple and a very poetic way, very economical, but an awful lot comes across to me there. Yeah. Anything else you guys want to say in regard to that, or should we do another clip?
Do another clip?
Yeah. Hang on, let me see. I had another choice, which is the two little girls in bed. Mm-hmm. Could we go to clip number 2, Jason? Can we watch that? Jason? Oh, okay. Oh my word! I mean, for me, it's such a phenomenal scene about children, and what they perceive, uh, and how gullible in some ways they can be as well. That innocence is so strong, especially in Anna. Um, it's obvious to me from Anna is so concerned about the little girl dying in the film and about Frankenstein dying in the film. And it makes me feel like she relates to both of those characters in James Whale's Frankenstein. That she likes a Frankenstein in a way, and she's very upset because he's killed in the film. And again, that becomes a reflection later in the film. When the fugitive comes off the train and goes back to the house, Anna's fascinated that this person is there. And she thinks that he is the embodiment of the spirit that Isabel told him about. And like the blind man in Frankenstein, she helps him. She gives him an apple. She gives him clothes, which wind up having terrible consequences. But again, the way that's tied in is quite wonderful. And I think with Isabel, it's she wants to. She's trying to help her sister mature in a way. It's like, it's all fake in a movie. They're not really dead, but then she says to Anna, but they do live in a spirit, and they can put on a form when they go out in the daytime. But if you talk to them, then they will appear to you. So it's like, in some ways, it made me wonder too. I wondered if Isabel ever saw her mother and her lover in the house, and that made her make this kind of connection in telling her sister that there was another figure, another spirit in that regard.
Well, yes.
Do you want to comment?
Well, there's also a perversity in Isabel, and it's the older sister who is going to, sort of, you'll forgive me, but mind fuck the younger one. And so Isabel is weaving her own spell, and I think that a lot is made of Anna, but I think that in the character of Isabel, she acts out a lot of the containment that everybody else is oppressed and holding in. But Isabel is the one that weaves this story. And I think she believes it too. But that is the perversity of falling in love with your own tale in a way. But
right.
To your point, it's interesting to wonder if Isabel saw her mother with a lover.
Yeah.
Because it would open the door to a lot of the acting out behavior that occurs later.
Yeah, true. Her line about he only comes out at night is what made me think that maybe she did see, that happen at some point. Since we brought up Isabel, I mean, could we go to another clip that Joan had chosen? Jason, if you go to clip number 6, this is a really a pretty amazing sequence in the film involving Isabel. Joan, do you want to comment on that?
Just to say that you would never be able to shoot that scene in the United States of America because the animal rights people would be down on you in an instant. But it makes me think about what you said about the mother. The mother is very seductive. And if Isabel she's in this sort of adolescent period of what it's going to be like to be a woman. So yes, she tries to kill this creature, but then goes to seeing what it's like to have, to make herself more seductive or more beautiful. Or so to me, that scene encapsulates her fury and her entrapment and her the explosion of getting out of her frustration, but then climbs back inside of the little girl who is advancing into adolescence. I mean, it's 25 different things going on, and you can make up the rest yourselves because, again, he leaves you room to wonder what in God's name is going on here.
I know. I'm struck by two things in that scene, and one is, she embraces the cat, and it's rather tender at first, and then when the cat starts to purr so loudly, and she says, "What's wrong with you?" Then she starts to choke the cat. So this tenderness turns into cruelty, But the other thing I love is when she does take the blood and place it on her lips. Again, it's in some ways it's a mixture of cruelty and tenderness, the blood mixed with the lips. But then he has it framed in that toy bureau, which brings you back to childhood again. I mean, the choice of using the mirror on that toy bureau was just a choice of genius, as far as I'm concerned. It's just absolutely brilliant on his part to have done that. I mean, it's quite a striking and memorable scene in the film, and it just, as you says, you can read it 25 different ways. Mara, how'd you feel?
I mean, for me, what's striking is that, like Isabel is the little sadist in the film. And, I read that scene as, I'm just going to strangle this creature because I have power over it.
Yes.
Like it's sort of testing
Yes.
limits, but just like, and in a way it parallels, the power she exercises over her sister, because Isabel is the one who makes up things and cons her sister. But her sister actually believes in what she says. She believes in the spirit, and I think that the previous clip we saw is also kind of a way of reading the, when they actually kill the guy and all she sees are the clothing. You can also read it as she thinks, oh, the spirit now changed clothing. It didn't actually die. That was just the clothes that he put on that day. And but what's interesting is that, the bravest, or I don't know if bravest, but the character that goes out into the unknown and, and is Anna. Like, she's the one that does not remain enclosed. So in a way, her gullibility and her innocence are also what make her kind of be the kind of the I don't know, I don't want to use the word hero, but like, she goes out and she tries to discover something new about the world, whereas the other characters are locked in, in pining or in their kind of insular worlds of their minds, but they don't want to discover anything new. They're just kind of in this looping.
At the end of the day, I think that Isabel is jealous of Anna by the end of the film, because Anna has had this incredible experience and Isabel hasn't. She's, as you say, she is locked in herself.
Right. Jason, you're back on. Are we need to close out, or can we continue? What do you want us to do?
I want you to continue, but we should probably close out.
Oh, okay.
It's so beautiful.
Are there questions?
There have not been questions. There was a few comments, but I think we covered most of what was there. I do want to make the offer for us to reconvene and do another film, and maybe in a few weeks, if you guys would be up for it. I know Joan, you were all thinking about the political scene right now. So
Yes.
Joan suggested The Fireman's Ball by Milos Forman, which is one of the great.
Yes.
It's not even a satire. It's a farce. It's something from theater of the absurd. It's something that somehow ducked the Czech censors. It's really an incredible.
Again, it's another subversive film. I mean, it was made during a time of tremendous oppression.
So if you guys in the audience want to see that, send us your assent in the chat, and we'll get that going for you in a few weeks. I want to thank you all for doing this, and I think we're obviously scratching the surface of this film. Each scene is its own little work of cinema that we can explore. But I know we usually wrap up around this time, so I want to say thank you so much for our panel of experts, Joan and Paul and Mara, and I think we should go out with a little goodbye. We still have some clips left, and I have a favorite, which is the long version of the clip, starting with the mother burning the letter.
Yes.
Can we? Paul, would you guys like to go out on that one?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to suggest you do clip number 8. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all. Thanks everybody.
And, for the audience watching, take a close look at the front of the letter, because there's a stamp of General Franco on the letter.
How about that? And it goes into the fire. How about that? If you like what you've seen tonight in another living room programs, please click on the offers button and make a donation to the CCA to support the living room. The rest of the living room programs are up at ccasantafe.org. Next week sometime we're going to give you a new date. We're going to have Paul Barnes back with Rick Burns talking about a movie about Oliver Sacks, which is so beautiful and powerful. Mara, you saw it. Paul, you saw it, I think, right?
I have to watch it still.
Okay. It's really, we love Oliver Sacks' writing. He wrote The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, and the Robin Williams, the one that was turned into a Robin Williams film, Awakenings, and others. He's, one of the, the world's kind of most popular scientific writers. But I didn't know what an incredible life he had led, just phenomenal, filled with courage and innovation and tragedy. And so this film gets into that, and we'll be talking with Rick Burns. And we have the great Kirsten Johnson, KJ, who is
Kirsten?
Yes, Kirsten's coming on a week from Sunday.
Yes.
There's a brand new film out that we're not going to show because you're going to be able to see that on Netflix. The new film is called Dick Johnson is Dead, which is just phenomenal. It's about her father wrestling with dementia, but it's not really about that. It's also about how we look at cinema. It's just, it's one of the most joyous films, surprisingly, that you're going to see this year. We're going to show her earlier feature called Camera Person, which is meditations on her 20 plus years as a cinematographer, and it's just stunning. And she's going to be talking to David Wilson from the True False Film Festival. That is a week from Sunday. And then the following week, we're going to have Paul Barnes and Ollie McGraw talking about the passage of the 19th Amendment, which couldn't be a more timely conversation. The centennial this year. Is that your Alice Paul flag behind you, Paul?
Yeah, that's the 36 stars when the amendment was passed.
What a story. It's Paul and Ken Burns made a wonderful film about that, and we're going to show excerpts from that. It is such a stirring story. If you think you know what happened to pass the 19th Amendment, you're wrong unless you've seen this film. So many surprises, a really wonderful program. That is a week from Tuesday. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, the 9th.
The 9th. So lots of good stuff at the living room. Thank you. We're going to go out with this wonderful clip. Thank you again, Paul, Mara, and Joan. We'll see you guys. We're going to corner you for another program, Fireman's Ball, in a couple of weeks. New date coming. Check your email. And here we are with clip 8. And we're going to be signing off once this clip is done. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Adios.
Adios.
Bye.
Gorgeous.